It is the ultimate symbol of femininity. We associate it with supermodels, red carpets, and elegance. But for centuries, the high heel was exclusively worn by men, and not just any men, but killers. It was invented as a military weapon for Persian cavalry to shoot arrows with deadly precision. To understand the heel, you have to forget about the catwalk and imagine a battlefield in the 10th century. You are looking at the Persian army, modern-day Iran. They had the most terrifying cavalry in the world. But riding a horse while shooting a bow and arrow is incredibly difficult. You need stability. If you stand up in the stirrups to take a shot and your foot slips, you fall. You die. So Persian engineers created a piece of military technology. They took the flat riding boot and attached a block of wood to the heel. This wasn't for fashion. It was a tool. It was a locking mechanism. When the soldier stood up in the saddle, the high heel hooked securely into the stirrup. It locked the leg in place. This allowed the archer to stand completely still on a galloping horse, turn his body, and fire arrows with sniper-like precision. So, the first high heels were essentially combat gear. They were the medieval equivalent of tactical combat boots or a gun holster. For centuries, if you saw a man wearing high heels, you didn't think he was pretty. You thought he was dangerous. He was a man who lived on a horse and killed for a living. But how did this piece of desert military kit end up in the royal palaces of Europe? Diplomacy. Fast forward to the year 1599. Shah Abbas I of Persia had a problem. He was fighting the Ottoman Empire, and he needed allies. So he sent a massive diplomatic mission to Europe. He sent his best soldiers, his ambassadors, and his elite cavalry to visit the courts of Spain, Germany, and Russia. When these Persian soldiers marched into the European capitals, the aristocrats were stunned. They had never seen men like this. They looked exotic, powerful, and incredibly masculine. And the Europeans noticed their shoes. These strange heeled boots gave the soldiers a towering height and a distinctive swagger. Almost immediately, a Persian mania swept through Europe. Aristocrats are like teenagers. They love to copy the cool new thing. European men started ordering heeled shoes from their cobblers to look like the tough Persian warriors. It was a way of saying, I am virile. I am a man of action. The heel became a status symbol of masculinity. But as it moved from the barracks to the ballroom, the design changed. The heels got higher, the shapes got thinner, and eventually, the most powerful man in the world hijacked the trend and made it his own brand. Enter King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. He was the absolute monarch of France. He built the Palace of Versailles. He believed he was chosen by God. But he had one major insecurity. He was short. Louis XIV was only 5 feet 4 inches tall. In a world where physical stature equaled power, this was unacceptable. He couldn't be smaller than his courtiers. So Louis weaponized the high heel. He commissioned shoes with massive 4-inch heels. He decorated them with battle scenes. But his signature move was the color. In 1673, he passed a law regarding his shoes. His heels would always be red. Why red? 2 reasons. 1. The economic flex. Red dye, cochineal, was incredibly expensive. By wearing red heels, he was showing that he was rich enough to crush money under his feet. 2. The violent symbolism. The red heel implied that the king was always ready to crush the enemies of France. It symbolized stepping in a pool of blood. It became the Louboutin of the 17th century, but strictly for men. Louis XIV made a decree. Only members of the royal court who were in the king's favor were allowed to wear red heels. It was a visual loyalty card. If you saw a man with red heels in Paris, you knew he had direct access to the king. If you fell out of favor, you had to change your shoes. So, for 100 years, the high heel was the ultimate symbol of patriarchy, power, and male authority. So, what happened? Why did men stop wearing them? Why did the gender polarity flip? It happened during the Enlightenment in the 18th century. This was the age of reason, science, and logic. Philosophers began to argue that men should be rational and useful. Flashy clothes, makeup, and high heels were seen as irrational and silly. Psychologists call this historical event the Great Male Renunciation. Men abandoned bright colors. They abandoned jewelry. They abandoned heels. They adopted the boring, dark, flat three-piece suit that we still wear today. They decided that a man's value came from his work, not his beauty. But women didn't renounce. As men abandoned the heel, women adopted it. Initially, women started wearing heels in the 1600s to look more masculine. It was a form of cross-dressing power play, like wearing a boyfriend's oversized shirt today. But once men abandoned the heel completely, it became exclusively female. And then, the design changed to reflect the new gender role. The men's heel was thick and blocky, like a cowboy boot. The women's heel became thin, unstable, and decorative. It transformed from a tool of mobility, riding a horse, to a tool of immobility. And this leads us to the dark psychology of the modern stiletto. In the 20th century, the stiletto was invented. A heel made of steel, thin as a dagger. Why do we find this attractive? Evolutionary biologists have a theory, and it is purely carnal. When a woman wears high heels, the biomechanics of her body change. To keep her balance and not fall forward, she has to push her chest out and arch her lower back. This posture, the arched back and protruding rear, is known in biology as lordosis behavior. In the animal kingdom, this is the universal mating posture. It signals to the male that the female is receptive. The high heel artificially forces the female body into this ready state constantly. Furthermore, the instability of the shoe changes the way she walks. It shortens the stride. It forces the hips to sway more to maintain the center of gravity. It emphasizes vulnerability. The Persian soldier wore the heel to be more stable and deadly. The modern woman wears the heel to be less stable and more alluring. It is the exact same object, but the function has been inverted 180 degrees. However, the manly heel didn't disappear completely. It went underground, or rather, it went to the Wild West. Look at a cowboy boot. Look at the heel. It is high. It is angled. Why? Because cowboys are horse riders just like the Persians. They needed the heel to lock into the stirrup. So, the direct descendant of the original Persian invention is not the stiletto. It is the cowboy boot. The American cowboy is unknowingly wearing the same shoes as the Persian cavalry. So, the next time you see a woman struggling to walk on a cobblestone street in 6-inch heels, or the next time you see a CEO wearing red-soled luxury shoes, remember the irony. You are looking at a piece of military technology that lost its war. You are looking at a locking mechanism that forgot its stirrup. The shoe hasn't changed. We just forgot who it was built for. At every modern wedding, the bride is surrounded by women in matching dresses. We think they are there for support. But historically, they were decoys. They dressed identically to the bride to confuse kidnappers and evil spirits, effectively acting as human shields so the bride could survive her own wedding. To understand the bridal party, you have to forget about romance and consent. For most of human history, if a man wanted a wife, he didn't ask her father. He didn't propose on one knee. He took her. This was called marriage by capture. In ancient tribes, from the Goths in Germany to the Huns in Asia, a wedding was essentially a kidnapping operation. The groom would gather his strongest friends, his gang, and raid a neighboring village. They would snatch the woman, throw her over a horse, and ride off before her family could kill them. This is where the bridesmaids come in. When a bride's family knew she was a target, or when the bride was being transported to the groom's village, she needed protection. But you couldn't just surround her with guards. That would draw attention. So, they used camouflage. They dressed her sisters and friends in the exact same clothes as the bride. Imagine a group of 10 women, all wearing white, all wearing veils, all looking identical. If a rival tribe or a rejected suitor attacked the procession to steal the bride, they wouldn't know which one was the real target. In the chaos of the ambush, they might grab a bridesmaid by mistake. The bride would escape. The bridesmaid would be taken. It was a calculated risk. The bridesmaids were literally the bait. They were the Secret Service agents of the ancient world, dressed to take a bullet or an arrow for the VIP. So, the matching dresses you see today are a relic of a tactical military decoy strategy. But humans weren't the only threat. In ancient Rome and Victorian England, people were terrified of something worse than kidnappers: evil spirits. The wedding day was seen as a moment of extreme spiritual vulnerability. A woman was transitioning from a maiden, protected by her father's household gods, to a wife, protected by her husband's gods. In that transition, during the ceremony itself, she belonged to no one. She was spiritually exposed. Demons, incubi, and the evil eye of jealous ex-lovers were believed to be watching, waiting to curse the bride or steal her womb's fertility. So, the Roman law required that a wedding must have at least 10 witnesses. But these witnesses, the bridesmaids and groomsmen, had to dress exactly like the bride and groom. Why? To create a hall of mirrors effect. The logic was that spirits are not very smart. They are easily confused. If a demon swooped down to curse the bride, it would see 10 identical women. It wouldn't know which one to curse. It might curse a bridesmaid instead. This is the dark origin of the uniform. Today, brides want to stand out. They wear a different dress than the bridesmaids to be the center of attention. But historically, standing out was a death sentence. The goal was to blend in. The goal was anonymity. If you were the only one wearing white, the devil could find you easily. If everyone wore white, you had a 1 in 10 chance of survival. Now, let's look at the men. The best man. Today, he is the groom's best friend. His job is to hold the rings and make a funny speech. But in the era of marriage by capture, the best man was not chosen for his humor or friendship. He was chosen for his violence. He was literally the best man with a sword. When the groom went to kidnap the bride, he needed a lieutenant, someone who could fight off the bride's angry brothers and father while the groom threw the girl over his shoulder. The best man was the muscle, and his job didn't end at the wedding. During the ceremony, the best man stood next to the groom, armed to the teeth. Why does he stand on the right side? Because his right hand, his sword hand, had to be free. If the bride's family burst into the church to stop the wedding, the best man would draw his sword and hold them off while the priest finished the vows. And the darkest part? The honeymoon. After the kidnapping, the groom and the bride would go into hiding for 1 moon cycle, about 30 days. They drank honey wine, mead, to stay intoxicated. The best man's job was to stand guard outside the door of the hideout. He was the bouncer. He ensured that no one rescued the bride until she was pregnant. Once she was pregnant, the marriage was legally irreversible and they could return to society. So, the best man is historically a co-conspirator in a felony abduction. Then there is the veil, the piece of fabric that covers the bride's face. We are told it symbolizes modesty and purity. That is the Victorian lie. The original purpose of the veil was, again, fear. In arranged marriages, which was 90% of history, the groom often had never seen the bride before. The father of the bride worried that if the groom saw her face before the "I do" and didn't like what he saw, he might run away. So, the veil was a business tactic. You don't unwrap the package until you've bought it. But spiritually, the veil served the same purpose as the matching dresses: disguise. In ancient Greece and Rome, the veil was often flame-colored, yellow or red, to look like fire. It was meant to scare away spirits. More importantly, it hid the bride's face from the evil eye. If a jealous neighbor looked at the bride with envy, the veil acted as a shield, reflecting the curse back. In some Eastern European traditions, the veil was meant to make the bride look like a ghost or a corpse. Why? Because spirits don't attack other spirits. By looking dead, pale, covered, silent, the bride could trick the demons into thinking she was already one of them. Finally, let's look at the end of the night. The groom carries the bride over the threshold of their new home. It is a romantic movie cliché, but historically it was a superstitious necessity. The threshold, the bottom of the door frame, was considered a portal between worlds. In Roman belief, the threshold was haunted by the household gods, lairs. There were two fears here. 1. The stumble. If the bride tripped or stumbled while walking into her new house for the first time, it was a catastrophic omen. It meant the marriage would be cursed or that the household gods had rejected her. To prevent this risk, the groom carried her. If her feet don't touch the ground, she can't trip. 2. The dragging. In the marriage by capture days, the bride was often kicking and screaming. She didn't want to go in. Carrying her over the threshold was the final act of the kidnapping. It was the moment she was physically forced into her new life. It wasn't a hug, it was a transport of property. But over centuries, as we forgot the violence, we kept the motion. We turned a scene of abduction into a scene of affection. So, the next time you are at a wedding, look at the altar. You are not looking at a party. You are looking at a military formation. The bridesmaids are the decoys, dressed to confuse the enemy. The best man is the armed guard, standing with his sword hand free. The veil is a shield against demons, and the groom is the kidnapper, waiting to carry his prize away. We have wrapped these traditions in silk and flowers. We play Pachelbel's canon in D. But beneath the tool and the makeup, the DNA of the ritual is still there. It is a survival strategy. It is a group of people forming a defensive circle to protect a man and a woman from a world that wants to tear them apart. And in a way, maybe that is romantic after all. You think wearing black to a funeral is a sign of respect for the dead? You couldn't be more wrong. Historically, black was a stealth suit. Our ancestors were terrified that the spirit of the deceased would see the living and try to drag them into the afterlife. We didn't wear black to honor them. We wore it to become invisible so the ghost wouldn't take us next. To understand the funeral dress code, we have to go back to a time when the line between life and death was paper thin. In tribal societies across Africa, Asia, and pre-Christian Europe, death wasn't seen as a natural end. It was a transition, and a dangerous one. People believed that when a person died, their spirit remained near the body for several days, confused and often angry. The ghost didn't want to go into the cold, dark unknown alone. It wanted company. It wanted to take its loved ones with it. Because of this ghost envy, the living had to find a way to attend the funeral without being noticed by the spirit. Some tribes painted their bodies with white ash to look like ghosts themselves, hoping the dead person would think they were already dead and leave them alone. But many others turned to black. They covered themselves in charcoal or dark mud. Why? Because in the shadows of a hut or under the night sky, a person covered in black disappears. Black was the ultimate camouflage. By wearing black, you were effectively turning off your light. You were telling the ghost, there is nothing here to see. Keep moving toward the light. So every time you put on a black suit for a burial today, you are performing a 5,000-year-old survival tactic. you are hiding in the shadows. The Romans, as always, took this primal fear and turned it into a strict social law. In ancient Rome, the standard outfit was the white toga. It represented purity, citizenship, and life. But when a family member died, the toga pura was stripped off. The mourners would put on a toga pulla, a dark charcoal-colored cloak made of dingy, unwashed wool. The people wearing these were called the sordidati. The word sordid today means dirty or shameful, and that was the point. The Romans believed that if you looked successful, clean, and happy, you would attract the jealousy of the dead. To stay safe, you had to look miserable. You had to look sordid. They would even rub ashes on their faces and leave their hair uncombed. The goal was to look so pathetic and already halfway to the grave that the spirit of the deceased would lose interest. It was a psychological shield. Look at me. I'm already suffering. You don't need to take me. I'm already a mess. This Roman tradition of the toga pulla is the direct ancestor of the black suit. But while the Romans used it for protection, the medieval world added a layer of spiritual judgment. During the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church gave the black color a new meaning: sin. Black was the color of the original sin. It represented the darkness of the soul without God. Funerals became less about hiding from a ghost and more about a public display of guilt. Wealthy families began to hire professional mourners. These were people, often poor women or monks, who were paid to wear black robes and follow the casket, crying and wailing loudly. The more people in black you had behind your coffin, the more sins were being washed away by their prayers. But this was also the era of the mourning cloak. These cloaks were massive, heavy, and made of crepe, a scratchy, uncomfortable silk that was treated with chemicals to make it completely dull. It reflected zero light. If you were a widow in the 1400s, you were expected to wear this death shroud for years. It was a social cage. The black dress told the world, "This woman is dead to the marriage market. Do not look at her. Do not touch her." It wasn't a fashion choice, it was a brand. You were branded by your husband's death. Everything we know about modern mourning comes from one woman, Queen Victoria. In 1861, her husband, Prince Albert, died. Victoria was devastated. But she didn't just mourn for a year, she mourned for 40 years. She wore nothing but black until the day she died in 1901. Because she was the queen of the largest empire on earth, the entire world followed her lead. The Victorian era turned mourning into a massive, profitable industry. There were strict levels of black. Deep mourning. For the first year, a widow had to wear widow's weeds, dull, heavy black crepe. No jewelry, no lace, no shine. Second mourning. After a year, she could add a little bit of silk or velvet, but it still had to be black. Half mourning. Finally, after 2 years, she could move to slight colors like lavender, mauve, or gray. If a woman wore a red dress too soon, she was socially executed. People would whisper that she had killed her husband to be free. This is also where the black veil became a standard. The veil wasn't just for tears, it was the final layer of the stealth suit. It physically blocked the face from the eyes of the public and the eyes of the dead. Victoria's obsession made black the color of dignity, but it also made it the color of a trap. To prove that wearing black is about ghost protection, we have to look at what else people did in the house when someone died. Along with putting on black clothes, people would stop the clocks. The moment of death was the moment time stopped. If the clock kept ticking, it might count down to the next death in the family. Cover the mirrors. This is the smoking gun. In the Victorian era and many European cultures, every mirror in the house was covered with black cloth. Why? Because they believed that the soul of the dead could get trapped inside the reflection. Or worse, if a living person looked into a mirror in a house of death, the ghost would see their reflection and pull them through the glass. By covering the mirrors and wearing black, the family was turning the house into a dark room. a place where reflections didn't exist, a place where the dead couldn't find a grip on the living. We stopped covering the mirrors in the 20th century, but we kept the black clothes. We kept the camouflage, even though we forgot what we were hiding from. So the next time you open your closet to pick out something for a funeral, when you reach for that black dress or that dark tie, realize that you aren't just following a tradition. You are putting on the armor of your ancestors. You are participating in a multi-generational game of hide and seek with the afterlife. We tell ourselves it's for respect. We tell ourselves it's elegant. But deep in our biological memory, we know the truth. We are trying to blend into the shadows. We are trying to be invisible. Because even in the 21st century, when we stand at the edge of an open grave, no one wants to be the one the ghost notices. Stay invisible.